All right, let's go ahead and do a quick ballpoint pen head drawing. I'll kind of narrate the steps along the way that I'm thinking about. So first start with our ball and jaw. It's typically how I get the head to be the right scale. I can change this at any time, so towards the beginning of the drawing in particular, when I have a lot of freedom to kind of change things and shift, I can move this around, but otherwise I want to get like a pretty good head shape on here. Try not to adjust too much. Usually I'll lay in a little thin line for the brow, and then a little like shape for the nose, and then maybe just a little start to the mouth. So things like the eyes, things like details, of course, not really focusing on those just yet. And this reference picture has some nice kind of hair here on the outside. So before I go into anything in detail, especially inside the face, try and get a pretty good rough idea of the size of the head and some of these large shapes on the outside. And I'm doing all this structure drawing, all these pieces with ballpoint pen. And I could set it up with pencil. I could try to give myself something a little bit softer to set up. But for me personally, I don't really mind seeing some of the structure later on in the drawing. To each their own. So if you want to use a pencil, if you want to use a gray pen especially, so like a light color, like a light gray pen or light gray marker, you could do that. But yeah, in particular, I don't do that. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and put just a little bit of center on there. The idea with these structure lines is a lot of them don't really show up that much once I'm really getting into it, so that's why I don't really think too hard about it. And then I can go ahead and put a little bit of the eyes. I tend to put a line, normally put a line across the face for the eyes. I tend to put more like a line for the tear duct connection, so like from one tear duct to the other. And then I'll lay in a little bit of rough idea where those eyes are going to go. So here's like my general setup. Usually I start with the nose. That's very personal to me, just because I find it to be an anchor. It's like a really good center. And then when you think about it, it projects off the face more than anything else. So I think that's also an important shape to get first. And then it changes when the face is turning, right? Like when the face turns in profile or turns 3/4, just rotating in general. But otherwise, it doesn't really change shape a lot the same way things like the eyes or the mouth could. Those change shape a lot with expression. The nose can also do that, but not as much. And so I find it to be a really reliable shape. And so right now I'm sketching in a little bit of the lighting that I see. And then right away I can also tell from everything I've been doing that I can move the mouth down a little bit. And again, a lot of those old lines I tend to find in my style don't really show up, or they're not too concerning as I get farther in. This is going to be kind of a quicker sketch too. Not trying to go too long on this one. These are sketches I would do to warm up or just to kind of sit down for a little bit and draw. So meaning not too crazy in terms of rendering. Nothing's really been shaded in or totally defined yet. Just kind of getting the general big shapes I see. Some of the lighting I do draw in, so those are the little shapes you see here on the chin, under the lip as well. What you see under the nose is kind of like mapping it out. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and put the eyes in. Very important part of the figure, right, of the portrait. So it's nice to get that in. Feeling good. It's really important to try to build the eyes at the same time. So maybe do no more than a few moves on one side and then jump right over to the other side and work on that eye as well. Really nice reference picture. I will try to link this picture. Shouldn't be too hard to do. I'll link it towards the bottom of the page or at some point in the video for sure. That way you can check it out. Okay. Again, not really putting the pupil or the iris in yet. You know, also just not really too interested in getting that in there at this stage. I want to get a little bit more going on, a little bit more with like the eyebrows, things like that. So speaking of, here's eyebrow. This reference, this figure, this person has very kind of round eyebrows. They're a little bit softer in shape, not as square as we might expect. A little bit of nice weathering and age on this photo, on this figure. So we'll get a little bit of that popped in there. And you'll see that a lot of my time is spent planning, right? This stage we're sketching the figure. Another way to look at it would be that we're kind of planning the figure out. So I'm not really diving into any details, not really getting too specific with any shape quite yet. And what I tend to find, and probably will come through on the video, is that once you start to shade, add a little bit of detail in there, kind of put these really specific pieces of lighting, these little bits of hair, the portrait will come together really quick. So all that to say, there's a lot of time spent kind of plotting out, make sure everything feels good, as well as it should or could, you know, meaning it's okay if it's a little bit different, especially the likeness, you know, especially these kinds of quicker portraits, quicker sketches. I would say that it's more about capturing the personality of the reference, personality of the picture. And if it's a little bit off, that's okay. You know, that's what you exchange for time. You know, by doing these quicker studies, which I think are so important because you get reps, right? I mean, like you get some good completed work. You know, you get those numbers, you get those pieces of paper filled with drawing. In exchange for that speed, you know, sometimes you do change the likeness a little bit. It looks a little bit different. But again, that's okay. I think it's very important to get that practice, get those reps. Okay, and then I'm just about ready to put the eyes in there, and then I'll kind of jump into everything, starting in no particular order either. I'll probably start with the nose. Again, that's a huge part of the face that I like to work on a lot first. It's one of my favorite features in general. So then that just kind of automatically gives me some encouragement to jump in there. Things like the clothing. This person looks like they're wearing kind of like almost like a sweater or hoodie. Not too concerned with that. I'll get, speaking of that too, a little bit of this neck, the neck anatomy, but not too much of it in there. Okay, I think we're just about ready to really dive in. So this for me would be finishing up the planning stages. I'll move that up a little bit. Okay, so last thing is, let me go ahead and get this pupil and iris into each eye. Again, kind of gently build them up. And by gently, I mean, you know, very light shapes at first. And even jumping back and forth, probably putting in first the iris, then followed by the pupil. There's nice, this was like a studio picture, so it has that nice little shine on the top. Okay, and then one of the main, I would say, shadows in this, like a main, almost like character in this face would be this cast shadow here on the bottom of the nose. A lot of the other shadows are a little bit softer, especially the ones on the side of the face. So usually, again, just to kind of get the depth started, this would be the one that I fill in. And with the ballpoint pen, I do the same thing with micron and ink in general. I do sort of this nice single direction vertical kind of shading. I actually think of it a lot like painting. So I would call it a wash, like a wash of shade. And that also implies I could build it up, like I could do it over and over and over again to get to the right value that I want. So even the shading, everything has this air of being built up. Sketch is built up, shading is built up. Even the way the eyes were just kind of built side by side. And that's not to be so cautious that you don't have this great energy or kind of like these spontaneous moments, even in things like ink that are very definitive, right? They're hard to erase. So it's not to take that away, to be too careful. But it is really nice to have that liberty to kind of build something up, not commit too fast. You can see that too, there is a lot of speed, right? A lot of nice flow, ideally, in the beginning. So the character's there, like the character of your drawing, kind of moving through it quickly. That's not going anywhere, especially if you have that kind of speed, you're able to move at that speed. So that's it. Again, watch those dark darks, like watch the darkest value of black, getting in there too quickly. Much better to build it up gradually. And you'll probably notice, especially with this piece in particular, I don't really go too dark. I don't go black. So I don't know how this sounds on video. Probably a little bit scratchy. But yeah, this is a big step now where I'm kind of washing over areas of the face to build up some of that character, some of that depth, right? Some of these even wrinkles and landmarks of the anatomy. Got some really nice sunken, pronounced cheekbones on this figure. Get a little bit of that eyebrow in there. You'll notice things like the hair I'm going to keep pretty simple. Again, this is more truly a sketch, meaning the level I leave it at will be pretty simple. Not too much direction change in the hair or anything. And this also is a way that I would draw if I was drawing out in public, if I was drawing a figure quickly and I didn't have a lot of time with them. Be it like, someone that I'm actually talking to and drawing, or I'm, people watching and drawing someone from a distance. This would be kind of the level that I leave it at. And this is cool because there's a certain point sometimes where you work a piece so much or you work a drawing so much that you have to like keep going. It's almost like you add so much detail that, well, then the rest of the drawing has to have that detail. And then there's this nice sweet spot you can leave these drawings in where they're simple, they didn't take too long, but they're effective. Like they got a lot of good information communicated. And some of this work in the eyes, especially these nice lids, I'll build that up a little bit more. So yeah, things like the hair right here, just gonna kind of build as a single shade for now. Gonna wash, really similar to painting. That kind of idea of kind of wiping or washing shade in one direction, very similar to architecture, like graphic design, kind of stuff we see in those worlds, drawing wise. And so that's where I definitely get that inspiration from those types of drawings I've looked at. The idea to me is that shading is more a designed type of shading, like it's just a single direction. It's not really wrapping around the form. And so what do you exchange? Like, well, maybe you lose some of the volume of the figure, like some of the dimensional quality. But you can also capture that if you do nice shapes and if you have like nice reflection of the features, nice structure to the head. You'll still have a very dimensional head, even with this kind of simple shading. And I like it. I find it very, again, kind of elegant. And I like vertical like compositions, so it makes sense I kind of like these vertical marks as well. And speaking of that, I have a feeling I'm going to do a couple of passes on here because I don't want to go totally black, like totally dark, but I do want to build up some of these values a little bit. And once again, you can see again, this is getting built kind of all together. So I'm not really like honing in on one area and getting it dark and black. I'm trying to go across the whole figure equally. And I'm careful of detail, especially in the hair, because I want the hair is kind of nice. It's a little bit like a little messy, almost like a bedhead kind of idea with this reference. So it's great. It's got like a lot of character in it. But I also don't want to add so many marks up here that I'm drawing away from the focal point, something like the eyes, which typically in portrait drawing, we want to maintain that as the focal point. We want that to be the point of interest. So that's it. We'll be careful with the hair up here. I want to show some of the direction, some of the locks, right? Like these little different pieces and changes in direction. But I don't want to get so crazy that, again, I lose track of all the cool stuff happening down here. I maintain that a lot of times by leaving these edges very open on the outside. So I'm going to leave that stuff kind of broken, as we call it in drawing. Broken meaning that although it's incomplete, you still complete it yourself. Like you visually are completing it. And so it kind of fades, detail-wise, kind of fades away, from the focal point. But it doesn't feel, incomplete truly, like you complete it yourself. So I'm putting some of these last little washes in, some of these surface details, like the nice wrinkle in the forehead, a little bit of like wrinkling around the mouth. So at this stage, now I'm going to strengthen a lot of the darks, like the darks that are important. So not all of them, not even the hoodie, which I think is like fairly dark. I'll kind of pass over that a few times, but this is more about strengthening the focal point, the eyes, as well as strengthening anything up here in the hair, like little pockets of dark. And to also, of course, just give this more like presence. Like this is fairly thin, admittedly, like on the outside, so I'll build it a little bit more. And usually I kind of start from the beginning. Again, not remembering the order, not caring like what order I went in, but kind of start from the beginning with like, okay, well, first I kind of hit the nose, right? That was one of the first areas that I did work in. So maybe I'll start there, but you'll see I'll kind of hop around, sort of hop around the face. And although that looks sometimes chaotic, like, is there no particular order to where the drawing is going, or like no particular steps, like an order to the steps? You can see that it's been built with a theory. Again, keeping it thin, not going too dark. And at the same time, the advantage to what I'm doing is I am building it evenly. Like I'm always checking everything. I'm not getting stuck in one area. I'm not getting stuck in like the lips or the eyes or anything. I'm not getting kind of hung up in those areas, because what can happen then is you overwork them. And then when I talked about earlier about leaving something kind of in a nice spot where it's not super detailed, that can happen too, where if one part gets really, really rendered, then the result would be, well, now you got to go and even everything else out on the face or on the figure. It's like now you got to go make everything just as detailed. And as I say that, again, my big priority would be to let me detail the eyes, the focal point. So what does detail mean? That means some of the more nuanced lighting, like some of the smaller moments of lighting and hatching. It means some of these areas get a little bit stronger in the line work. So I'll trace over the same line a couple of times, not only to darken it, but to make it more specific, like get it very accurate. You can see already how this eye is a lot more pronounced than the one on the right. So as we speak, we're kind of getting that effect. So now I'll come over here, do the same thing. I'll hit some of these areas, especially with the nice folds in the lid. Get them a little more pronounced, a little bit darker, show a bit of that tear duct anatomy. So you can see a lot of extra work is going into the eyes. That's going to bring them out. Again, what we refer to, of course, as focal points, the center of interest. still very soft edges, right? Meaning a lot of these lines and shapes almost blend together, which is what I want, especially in the eyes. One of the trickiest things about the eyes is we as artists, those of us who are drawing, we get really excited about drawing those shapes, and so then we put a lot of detail, which I'm doing the same thing, right? But what can be really dangerous is like really like pressing hard and like really defining every single little shape. And instead, what we want is we want these to feel soft, because they're alive. Like the whole figure, the whole head is alive, but the eyes in particular, we want them to feel as though they could move, that they could change direction at any time, right? And so we keep them kind of soft, like we intentionally let those shapes blend together a lot. A lot of really nice locks, a lot of nice hair coming in. So you can see some of that dark now is built on the mouth, on the nose, of course. Just coming in and gently trimming a little bit of area here and there. Leaving this stuff kind of vertical, but might pull a couple of hairs just to imply some direction. Not too many. Get a little more specific both in the neck anatomy, just because there's some nice kind of musculature here. And then here comes that washing idea, where we say, okay, well, let me start to wash these areas again with shade. So not really changing the direction. I'm kind of adding more shade in there. And everything in general could use another pass. So the outfit, get that a little bit darker. And then definitely the hair. That's like the next big area I want to come back to. This kind of washing that's very long, knows how high up I am on the tool. Like I'm not grabbing it like I would handwrite. I'm very much holding it really high back here. Way back. And now I see better, like I can see the pen a lot better, but then it also lets me kind of use more of my arm or use my wrist to its full degree, versus stuff like this where it's really tiny. We're kind of holding that handwriting hand. Okay, so we want to start taking this one to the finish line. So I'm just strengthening some of this shading in the face. Try not to carve in general the whole jaw. That can sometimes pop it off the neck and make it look a little bit too two-dimensional, but that's it. I'm going to choose these little moments, like especially around the chin. Darken and make those feel a little more definite, just so there's a sense that the face is projecting forward. It's coming off the neck a little bit more. There's a nice earring over here, so this would be a good moment too to shade around that, just to kind of give that some pronunciation, to kind of show it a little bit more. So areas that are like really tucked into the head, like where the hair is really tucked in. Of course, those are good moments to do this, to kind of build a little bit darker. By keeping the same direction, I think we kind of avoid chaos. In theory, like this is nice in my opinion, where it's kind of got a lot of information, right? Like a lot of scratching, a lot of shading. But then by not going lots of different directions, we still give it like a sense of peace. Like it's a calm kind of like style or drawing, because we're not going crazy changing the direction of the shading. So that kind of slows it down literally and physically. Like physically, the drawing doesn't look as, chaotic. And then emotionally, of course, because it's just a portrait, it's a quiet portrait of someone. We don't feel really like on edge about it. So I'm gonna pick out some specific locks, specific pieces of hair. The shapes right here on the side of the head are a little bit more definite. You know what I mean? Like they have a little bit more edge to them, especially like these nice little curls. But then as we get towards the outside, meaning like on the top, as well as it kind of gets less solid, then we won't complete that shape. Again, we'll leave it kind of open. So a lot of rhythm in the hair, a lot of what we would refer to as S curves, right? So curved, kind of S curves versus like a C or like an arc. Like, no, we get these nice kind of like S shapes, and that's some good flow. You know what I mean? Like that's a good change in direction too from stuff we're seeing on the face. The face, if we can by default, is a little bit more linear, right? So it's more solid. It's more solid structure. So then we don't see as many of like these arcs, you know, like really nice S's or anything. Like it's a little bit more box-like, right? More dimensional. But the hair is the opposite. The hair gets very rhythmic, especially this kind of hair. So, and if we can show that difference between the two, then that's cool because we show two different textures, which of course adds some not only variety to the drawing but some believability to it. You know, meaning it feels a little bit more real. Just a little bit of shade there to show that brow, especially for men who have kind of that stronger, sometimes change in the brow. Part of the reason I'm back here on the head is getting some final darks. Sort of asking myself, okay, is this as dark as I want this to get before I finish it off with the hair? And this reference picture, this portrait, this is really nice, deep shadow under the bottom lip. It's not like a strong plane change, like it's actually a little bit softer, like all around, but it is interesting how large it is. Like it's a little bit larger than what we'd expect. You'd be surprised with shading or with shapes. Those are things that can add to likeness, you know, meaning making it look like the picture, making it look like the person. You know, it could be simple as just identifying like, well, that's unique to this figure, that's unique to this man, is that sort of nice long tall shadow under his bottom lip. And so through including that, you know, that helps his likeness, even just as much as things that we usually expect, like eyes or, you know, a nose or the mouth. And then even more surface, right, would be things like, oh, well, the color of the eyes or the color of the hair. But in this case, we don't have those. Like we can imply them through value and shade, but we don't actually get to work with those a lot. So we have to rely on other things to show the likeness. These are really nice. As you get a little bit older, you get these nice kind of lines across the neck. I love those. You know, again, that's part of the reason I chose this reference picture is I like character. I like, you know, aging and weathering. I think it's wonderful. It's a lot of nice moments you can pull out of that in drawing. Notice how the hair is never too spaghetti like although there's like the shading going through it, I don't draw every single strand or draw them like, you know, going down the side or up or something. It's more like these pieces, like these locks, these little curls. And that's something that prevents the hair from feeling too flat. It's almost like the eyes where it's cool to kind of leave it in motion. It's cool to kind of give it a sense that it's not solid so that we sort of emotionally react to the idea that it could move. It's not just locked into place, right? And this, of course, is very stylized hair. You know what I mean? It's not super realistic. Other people might spend more time rendering it. They might spend hours and hours rendering it, but I won't in a piece like this. You know, again, in a setting like this. And that's part of the challenge. Would be, you know, if you only have a certain amount of time or a tool that won't get very dark, like in this case, the ballpoint pen. You know, what choices will you make in completing this figure or capturing the likeness? So now I'm getting into the closing stages. Again, I could see the hair getting a little bit darker here and there, but also watching out so I don't get it too solid or distracting. I kind of like this thin, sort of ever-changing shape that it is right now. Again, kind of fits to me the portrait, the reference in particular. It's getting a little bit more of these nice curls. There's a lot of chaos in the hair. And then I'll check back to, not in particular time, but check down here. Oh, I make sure these moments still feel strong. You know, and also there's a little bit of the aging here. It's wonderful. You know, we kind of typically call like the crow's feet, right? That's nice. A little bit of aging in the bridge. So again, kind of going back and forth, making sure I'm not losing sight of what's happening down here. And even some of the darks, right? Like just a little bit more dark around the eyes. I think we did okay with that goal, where the eyes have the most detail, they have the most nuance, like the most kind of small changes, right, in shading. And so as a result, we hopefully keep our focus on that, especially, our viewer. And that's one of the hardest things, is to treat ourselves like a viewer, to step away from the drawing emotionally, or even like as we are literally in the middle of drawing it, and make sure like, hey, if I was the viewer, would this be interesting? Like, would I find this effective to look at or cool, right? And that's where some of those decisions come in, like what's darker, what's lighter, what's emphasized, what's not. So I think I'm just about feeling nice. There's like a little kind of pit of dark here that's cool, where all the hair's sort of spinning or coming out of, like a little source, and so I'm just building that a little bit. I kind of like this part being lighter too, where the idea is the light's hitting this a little bit more. I do like some of these really like micro moves. Hopefully you can see, this is in particular the style that I draw on, where you can see the circle from before. You can see the structure line cutting through the head, but again, I don't mind. Like, that doesn't bother me. It's, at this point, it's become like a signature in a way, which one, I'm fine with, and then two, I really find the drawings, again, enjoyable, or I like them regardless of seeing that. It almost to me is a little bit cool, because I think I've always liked to see process. Even when I go to the museum, or I'm looking at a piece of artwork, I think what I'm responding to is the sketches. I love the paintings, and then I love if there's the sketch, whether it's someone's sketches or the sketch of the final painting. I find myself really drawn to that, because I love process. And so I guess in a way that's carried over here too. It's carried over to this kind of work where, I like seeing process. I think it's kind of an interesting part of the drawing. And so to finish that off, I think it's cool. Like, I like it. And then in my mind, I don't think you see it that much. Like, it doesn't really show up that much. And even if you remember, there's the lip line, I can see it, that was higher up. And so there's those little changes to lots of the shapes, but, nothing really in my mind that's too distracting. Okay, so final thoughts, just checking these little like wrinkles, maybe some just nice little imperfections to the skin. Just gently changing the direction, nothing too crazy, but just a little bit of like extra direction. Again, in the face, everything else very vertical, right? And then a final thing, speaking of a signature thing I like to do, is I do like to add sometimes some kind of movement or action on the sides. And so I'll actually kind of whip a little bit of line here. And what I like is that's also very unpredictable. It's like a moment that I couldn't predict in what I assume kind of looks like a controlled drawing. So that's just a little like kind of action movement idea that I like a lot. Okay, so just wrapping this up. And some last little bits and pieces on there. And I think we're going to call it done. So we'll cut to a scan of this to see how it looks all scanned. And thanks for checking it out. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the comments. And otherwise, thanks for joining me. Talk to you soon. See ya.